Hello and good morning to today's Talk at 10. Manufacturers in West London and beyond are having to make rapid changes to the manufacturing floor due to coronavirus. Today, we look at how two leading West London businesses have not only been able to adapt and continue to manufacture, but also contribute to helping in the fight back against COVID-19. We're delighted to welcome to our panel Anika, Director of Sustainability and co-founder of Ology, and Julian Scriven, Managing Director of Brompton Bike Hire. We also have expert input from Tim Foster, Partner Risk Advisory Services at BDO, who has many years' experience servicing leading companies throughout the UK and the world across a number of sectors, including manufacturing, consumer goods and retail, diversified industrials, automotive and utilities. Throughout the programme, as always, my colleague Pim will be monitoring your questions in the YouTube live chat window, so please keep them coming. Now, as always, I should urge you not to forget the West London Business Support Helpline. We're bringing up on screen the website address you can go to, coronavirus.westlondon.com, and the telephone number 020 8607 2500 for all of your coronavirus queries. I should thank Better Futures, who are kindly supporting our Talk at 10 webcasts. They are, of course, the Mayor of London's flagship programme to create a clean tech cluster in London. If you're wondering how to apply for Better Futures, in order to be eligible, you must be an SME, have a London address, although you don't have to have your head office or registered address in London. You must have or be about to develop a clean technology. That's any product or service that has a good impact on the environment. You must have a balance sheet below 43 million euros, and you mustn't be a subsidiary or under control of one or several other enterprises. So if that fits your business and projects that you're currently working on, please apply with an email to Tianchi Lee, PhD, at West London Business with a brief introduction to your organisation. So, let's get down to business. On the programme today, we're going to be looking, first of all, at practical considerations in the manufacturing environment at this time. Then we'll explore supply chain, financial and legal issues, followed by how businesses on today's programme have been helping the fight against the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, we'll take a look at the long term. So a warm welcome to my panel this morning. I'd like to first of all bring in Tim just to share with our listeners what your experience has been over the past 2 months in the conversations you've been having with client firms and other stakeholders. Give us a flavour of what you're hearing right now, Tim.
Thanks, Andrew. Yes, we're seeing quite a few different scenarios across the manufacturing landscape. I think it's very much dependent on what subsector organisations are working in. There are those which are who have been able to carry on working, but in a different way across the last sort of 8-9 weeks. There are some which have had to fully close down and are now considering opening back up following the government guidelines. And I think there's been quite a lot of challenges about understanding, what they need to do. Specifically, some are further ahead down the line, but we're still seeing a good proportion of manufacturing clients, I won't say scratching their heads, but still trying to get to grips with the new guidelines and how they can implement that quickly across their operations in order to satisfy the demand requirements that are on their businesses.
And would you say, 7-8 weeks in, that things are perhaps a little bit calmer than the immediate aftermath of lockdown?
I think so. I think there's still a lot of organisations who are trying to get to grips as to the actual level of demand that they are going to have to cater for. But I think the big struggle at the moment is just trying to understand the practicalities of their strength of their supply chain, the changes that they need to make to their sites, and trying to work out practical steps to get people back into their factories over the next sort of 2 or 3 weeks. So I still think that there's a lot of change afoot, and a lot of this is going to be based around how quickly organizations can think and make decisions and get those actions underway.
Thank you. And if I can bring Anika in now, it'd be great to hear from you then, Julian, sort of on the coalface of sort of running your business. And I should also, of course, note our West London company of the year 2020. So once again, congratulations. What's it felt like for you, Anika?
Well, thank you very much for having me on. Ology produces packaging, a lot produced in China, and also produced some locally. What it's been like for us? Well, within 24 hours, we switched our staff to remote working, but we are used to that also because within our supply chain, we are doing a lot of remote communication and production anyway. One of the things we had to do was also to make sure we could access our machinery remotely so that we only could operate with one person here in our studio in Park Royal and have the machines operated using a variety of platforms from people's homes. So we were able then to sample PPE visor testing free of charge to, for example, schools and further education colleges, who then turned their redundant artwork studios into developing 3D printing for PPE visors. So that was fantastic that we were able to use technology in such a swift way and keep our production going.
Extraordinary, and I think we're going to pick your brains a bit further on that story and how that sort of unfolded later in the programme. Julian, I wonder whether you can give us a bit of a flavour. You're of course just down the road from Anika, who's in Park Royal. What's it felt like at the Brompton factory?
Well, there's quite a few facets to the Brompton factory. So we've got the main manufacturing floor, and unfortunately we cannot do that remotely. A lot of it is brazing, which is like welding. So our real goal and mission from day one was to protect our manufacturing staff as much as we could. So we immediately moved everyone who could work remotely, including myself. I'm at home today, out of the factory. On the factory floor itself, we introduced social distancing. So we literally closed a third of all of the workstations to give ourselves some 2 meter gaps, and simple things like staggering when people went on to breaks and things like that. So we avoided kind of having people gathering too much. So it was quite surprising how quickly we were able to react. I think we surprised ourselves. And as we sit here today, we would say, excluding for stuff from supply chain, we've probably only seen a 20 to 30% drop in our ability to output bikes.
Wow, that's quite something. And I noticed in my inbox that amidst all of this, you've managed to launch a new range of beautiful Brompton bags this week that were so popular it kicked your website over.
Yes, shall we say at the moment people are looking at modes of transport that will enable them to achieve social distancing. We did also launch direct to home, Brompton direct to home for the first time, so people can buy the bikes and have them delivered direct to their home. And yes, the combination of that and launching a new bag range, plus everyone looking to have a Brompton, has, shall we say, stress tested our website for these three.
Well, has to be done once in a while, and I'm sure you've put it on steroids now. Well, I'm going to take us on to the first theme of today's programme, and that's practical considerations that the wider manufacturing community can take away from all three of your experiences. And I'd like to turn back to Tim first of all to get a sense of your take on how the COVID-19 secure guidance that launched last week, and we gave viewers a little bit of a flavour of in last week's programme, how you're seeing that sort of work on the ground, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. I think they're quite interesting, actually. I mean, we've been having a number of sessions over the last couple of weeks with a range of clients, and we've been talking through some of the aspects of sort of returning back to, our some form of semblance of order. and looking at the guidance, we've been sort of surveying to find out actually how people have been responding to it. I think in the main, I think that the view is that it's actually been quite useful to look through the guidance. I think it's been relatively easy to follow. As you've got up on the screen about having sort of risk assessments. I think that's probably been where most organisations have been spending most of their time over the last week or so. Has been about designing those risk assessments and getting out onto their premises and running those through to make sure that they are taking the appropriate steps necessary in order to safeguard, their employees.
And of course, one of the really sort of practical challenges for most manufacturers I've been talking to is sometimes a lack of space. Are you finding that a number of businesses are having to look at new kind of shift patterns to get around the physical space challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose part of this comes back to what Julian was saying, that we're seeing clients that are moving on to 24/7 operations with sort of 3 shifts. And I think that's not just about how they can operate on the floor, but it's also about their access to facilities. So where people can take breaks. We're finding that toilet facilities are a challenge. Some of these have been designed where really you can only have one person in there at a time, and obviously that's creating issues in terms of how many people you can have on the floor.
Yes. Now I'm going to bring Julian back in, because I think it'd be great to hear a bit more around how it's working, in practice within the Brompton sort of factory floor. Because I know from my past visits, whilst you've got a new factory, it's a factory that you've been putting to work hard with the launch of your e-bikes, etc. So how are you getting around these COVID-19 social distancing challenges, Julian?
Well, I think challenge is the right word. We were very fortunate that we had a new member of our team come on board at the beginning of this year, who's actually specialises in optimising process flows through manufacturing plants. And so to have him on hand, and he was able to actually reorganise our whole floor in the space of 10 days, such that we were able to, as I said before, achieve 2 metre distancing at each workstation, whilst only losing about 20% of capacity. We have, as I said, one of the first things we did was to actually just say who actually needs to be in the factory, who really needs to be in the factory. And I'll be honest enough to say, since shutdown, I've been in the factory 3 days, and have no need to be in there at all. We were talking, ironically, as a sustainable transport company about the limitations of our parking space. I have to say, I'm delighted to say that is no longer an issue. A lot of our staff that are working there are now cycling in, and those who can work remotely are working remotely. So it's been challenging, but actually we were surprised that once the motivation is there, what the art of the possible really is about.
That's great to hear, and I imagine with 20% down on capacity but rising demand, you're continuing to have to scratch your heads as to how you meet the growing need that's in the wider community. And Anika, if I can bring you in, it'd be great to hear your reflections on when you look forward, how you see your team sort of working in the future with the sort of restrictions that are now a daily reality. Anika.
So the challenges we've been working with actually since the end of January, because of course COVID happened first in China. So we had lots of legislation that we had to deal with, 5 months ago. So we're quite adept now at knowing with our workforce in China went back to the office on the 8th of March, and they're wearing masks and they are following the guidelines that's local to them. We have had challenges also now bringing people back to work. But my question is, just as Julian has said, is who does need to be back here on site? And how can we streamline the rota? How can we streamline the IT? what more investment should we put in IT? We've been very lucky to have an excellent IT partner, also from West London, to support us in this. And that's what we're looking at. But what I would like to emphasise is that the positivities that have come out of COVID, in particular with this looking at personal health and well-being, obviously fall on the agenda. Second of all is remote working, and third of all being sustainability. Those are my three takeouts. On the second point, I'd like to, over the next 6 weeks, how can we try and facilitate for buildings, whether they be domestic or commercial, to be 24/7, so not 9 to 5 in an office environment or manufacturing environment, and then 5 to 9 where we all go home and enjoy. How can we change legislation so we have businesses and buildings working all the time? So in our instances, we have found that we are up against obstacles such as planning consent, where we cannot change a shop or showroom to also be work-home units. There isn't a planning rule for that, so we can't get an application in. But we'd very much like to be able to use the facility in the daytime for the staff and in the evening for living. So that would be a very easy, quick win to prevent people moving. So that's something
really interesting idea there, Anika, and it sort of, I think, reflects a number of conversations we've been having, and something for us to note down and pick up in our conversations with local and central government. We'll bring up on screen, I think, now just some reminders of the government guidance around coming to and leaving work. Because I think one of the points that I'm sure will be close to your heart, Julian, is the point raised around the importance of employers making sure that there's additional parking or facilities such as bike racks. Now, in our recent conversations with the Park Royal Business Group, that lack of bike racks and secure storage has come up as something that we're going to have to work pretty quickly on. What's your take on this rapid change of infrastructure requirements?
Well, what I can comment on at present is whereas we would perhaps have one or two companies reach out to us a week, kind of asking what kind of solutions they could put in place, I would say I'm getting between 5 and 10 companies per day coming to me and saying, how can we get our staff back to work in a way that they can maintain social distancing while they're travelling. And I think the thing that really has become very clear to me is that staff really do trust their companies to respect their safety at work, but they're still feeling very, very anxious about how they get to work. And it's no coincidence that we launched our kind of corporate bike hire earlier this year, and that has just gone through the absolute roof because it enables businesses to actually achieve that. And I think really it is making businesses rethink what their duty is towards their staff in terms of travel, above and beyond just saying you need to get to work. It's actually giving them alternatives and giving them the options and the opportunity to use things other than cars or public transport.
I've certainly been struck in recent conversations that how new the kind of cycle to work schemes are for many smaller businesses. I think larger businesses have sort of built quite a lot of familiarity with the sort of the cost savings for employees of buying a bicycle through a cycle to work scheme, but for many small businesses it does seem to be entirely new and something that we're trying to share more information on in the days and weeks ahead from West London Business. Now, if I can bring Tim back in, it'd be great to get a sense of perhaps what you think some of we've talked around quite a few of the considerations that are coming up in folks' in trays at the moment. But do you have sort of any additional thoughts that you think manufacturing firms should be thinking about at this time when they're working through the risks thrown up by COVID-19?
I think the one of the main risks that we're seeing is around supply chain. So more broadly, obviously we're having to make adjustments to our factories, our operations, how we're dealing with employees and making sure that they're safeguarded. I think there's a fundamental element around reviewing your risk profile across your organisation and the challenges that you're potentially going to be exposed to in the next sort of 3 to 6 months. And that's not just from a financial standpoint, but also about supply chain. We've been working with clients in reassessing their supply chain, because our concern is that we were working on the assumption that when we came back on stream and ramped up our production, that actually our supply chain would be there to support us. And what we've been finding is that that's not necessarily the case. I think most manufacturers have a good understanding of their tier one suppliers, but actually, do they have a good understanding of suppliers further down the supply chain? So we've seen some disappointment where manufacturers have been coming back on stream, and they've had issues with their suppliers because their suppliers haven't been able to provide them with the materials and services that they actually need, and particularly where it's potentially materials which are coming from overseas. I think another challenge that we've been finding as well is around, and this comes back to the government guidelines and doing the risk assessments. So what we're making, great strides in being able to ensure that we've got PPE and policies and procedures in place to protect our own people in our own manufacturing sites. But we're hearing that suppliers are sometimes turning up who don't necessarily have the same level of consideration. So where we've had trucks turning up with supplies being driven by people who haven't necessarily got PPE equipment, and they've actually had to be halted at the gate and not allowed on site. And we've heard a few stories of that.
Interesting, and you've beautifully segued us into the next theme of the morning there, Tim, of this challenge of supply chains, and then the sort of wider sort of financial considerations. I mean, I know from conversations with many businesses that until COVID-19 struck, they didn't necessarily have very much visibility of tier 2 and tier 3 within their supply chain, and that I'm sure presents challenges for all sorts of reasons. Anika, I wonder whether you can tell us a bit more, particularly from a sustainability perspective, which I know really goes right to the heart of your company's values, how you've been navigating supply chain challenges over the past few weeks, and particularly how do you get transparency right the way through, particularly for the materials that you're sourcing for packaging. Anika.
Well, Rapology has been working very hard over the past 3 years on our 6 pillars of sustainability for responsible sourcing, and this has been ever more apparent as we've been working with clients to say, what is it that you actually are buying, and why are you buying it, and how can we reduce unnecessary waste and still reduce costs? Because I think a lot of people have been worrying, such as purchasing managers, that they are increasing their approach to sustainability, and there also comes at a cost. It doesn't. And only yesterday we did a packing study on a client with a new brief, and we were looking at saving almost 200,000 bags that would have been used for packing and then would have been thrown away. So we're really looking at that, because that reduces the amount of goods that are being made in the first place, moved and then disposed of. So we work hard on the sustainability. Our suppliers, we're very clear about who they are, but I think this is also, I suppose, put a bit of a spotlight on what is the UK got in terms of manufacturing. And I think obviously we've just had Tim talking about PPE, for example. What businesses in the UK are producing and manufacturing PPE? What other things could we be looking at? In 2021, we've got the tax on single-use plastic. Where are we in the UK on looking at that closed-loop recycling system for plastic? So there's a lot of things, again, that we can do, I think, and look at very quickly in terms of homegrown supply chains, UK-based manufacturers, and signposting, making it clear and championing those businesses that really we could make it here and export to the rest of the world.
A really good food for thought, and an important message there that it doesn't always cost more to do environmentally the right thing. Often there are financial savings to be had. Now I recollect from some of our past conversations that you've mentioned a platform called Eco Vadas to me, which if I remember rightly was about one of your customers starting to I suppose, request more transparency from you and then your tier ones and twos. Can you tell us a little bit about how Eco Vadas works?
Do you know what? It's fantastic when clients push us in a direction and make sure that we are being transparent. And Eco Vadas is one of those green certification systems that look at an awful lot of things, actually, not just a green, but also in terms of anti-slavery, anti-bribery. There's a lot of things in terms of critical decisions in supply chain procurement. It's a certification in which you can get different levels of awards, and I'd encourage everybody to take part in, if it's not this one, something similar, because it means that you're fully looked at all the way through your supply chain. There's other certifications also out there in terms of responsible sourcing, where do materials come from, but it's very important not to fall into greenwashing. It's very important to be able to get a certification that's independent and that you can put that as a stamp and a reference number all the way through and audit your supply chain.
So tough questions from Eco Vadas that have then forced you to kind of rethink and check that you're always doing the right thing. That, but also then training our staff, training our supply chain, and then of course training our clients, because our responsibility as manufacturers and supply chain coordinators is to sit with the client and say because we've got these 6 pillars which underpins our business model, what can we do to make sure that the decisions you're making are sustainable decisions? What can we strip out? Can we get you to make a decision and sign off on this order 2 weeks earlier so that you don't need to be air freighting goods, that you don't fall into the trap of just using more carbon or using more materials when you really don't have to if you take a centimetre off that size of a box, for example. So it's all about the planning right at the very beginning with the purchasing manager, and I'd encourage, in our opinion anyway, that thinking to be right at the start of the brief. We always give, Andrew, a quotation for what they've asked for, and we also give them the healthy option, and we find they usually go for the healthy option because it's both cheaper and less carbon intensive. Fascinating. Now we're going to bring up on screen a photo of a line of NHS branded Brompton bikes, and I'm going to bring Julian back in, just perhaps reflect on what it's felt like for your team getting these out of the door, but also perhaps on the supply chain piece. Has your supply chain run beautifully smoothly over the past 2 months, or have there been some challenges to get around?
I think we've been going since 1985, and there's never been a day when our supply chain has gone smoothly. Just like any manufacturing business in the UK. I mean, I think we're very fortunate insofar that roughly 80% of the components that go into a Brompton are either actually manufactured directly in the factory or are from UK suppliers. And in addition, 70% of our bikes are exported. So we're a net exporter. So again, in terms of primary supply chain providers, we've not had too many problems. Where we did hit some challenges was on our electric bikes in the short term, because there were components going into batteries and components going into motors that were coming from all over the world. And so suddenly, a secondary, tertiary, even a fourth one down the line was suddenly causing us challenges. But fortunately, we've got a very nimble procurement team, and they were playing the kind of, I suppose, the procurement equivalent of whack-a-mole to secure that we were getting components in when we needed them. I mean, one thing I've noticed looking at this lovely picture of these Bromptons that Anika has no doubt picked up on, there's currently some plastic wrap on those, Anika, so perhaps we need to have a chat with you down the line whether that's really essential or not. But the Wheels for Heroes thing was, is, and continues to be a massive logistical challenge. I mean, we have, as of today, got over 1,500 NHS key sector workers who have registered for the scheme. We have manufactured specifically for them around about 800 bikes. That's a small selection there. And we've also got every single one of our bike hire bikes that weren't currently in docks out to them as well. So we're looking at probably a mobilisation on the consumer side of the rental business like never been experienced before, and that's certainly developed some challenges. But it's also developed some good practice as well. So we've changed the way that we actually manufacture bikes for our bike hire team off the back of this, because we could see opportunities to be more streamlined. We could see steps that could be combined or even removed entirely from the process, and we started to work as an integrated business rather than kind of a dysfunctional family.
Fantastic. So sort of the pressure of the situation driving innovation through the organisation. Now, very quickly, Tim, we're going to bring up on screen a sort of supplier contracts tip sheet, I think, for want of a better word. I wonder whether you'd like to just sort of talk us through some, perhaps picking out two or three of your top sort of critical tips there on supplier contracts.
Yeah, indeed. I think, as I already mentioned, I think understanding your emerging risks is crucial, and I think understanding the supply chain and the risk profile that has and it represents for your business is crucial as well. So as Julian was saying, 80% of supply is within the UK. We're finding across the client base, particularly in certain sectors, that the vast majority of their supply is actually coming from overseas. So, do we fully understand that supply network, not just in terms of suppliers and their financial viability going forwards, but also about the strength of the chain in terms of transport. There are, COVID is affecting different countries at different paces at the moment. If we take, for example, if we've got supply coming in from Brazil, we know that's been hit particularly hard at the moment, and also the shipping sector has been hit particularly hard. It's taking into account all of this chain effect around the world to really get a good handle as to whether you're going to be able to secure your supply over the next sort of 3 to 6 months.
And I guess in that vein, on your tip sheet, you talk about being ready for emergency renegotiations with your suppliers if necessary.
Absolutely, and I think that's another crucial factor in the short term is looking at your supplier contracts. And looking for ways in which you can enforce elements of those with your suppliers, but where need be is making sure that you haven't got during lockdown that any of our sort of supplier contracts have fallen by the wayside, and that we actually are suddenly going to get into very difficult renegotiation positions because we've left it until the last minute. Having a very good understanding of your contractual aspects and working towards those to make sure that you're getting early discussions underway.
Interesting. Now I'm going to bring following Tim, we're going to bring Pim, my colleague, in for some question perhaps from our YouTube viewers. Pim.
So, a question for Julian. Last month, Brompton wrote a letter to the Minister of State for Transport to encourage local authorities to implement temporary infrastructure for cycling, given the crisis. Are you happy with the government's transport pledges in its recovery plan, including emergency pop-up bike lanes, or do you think there's anything more that should be done?
Very good question. Thank you for that. We were fortunate enough to have an informal briefing with Chris Heaton-Harris on Friday last week to get some more substance behind their pledges for the finances, and it's still under wraps at the moment. So unfortunately, I can't share more. I would say what they're doing today compared to where they were a month ago is fantastic. It's a massive step forward. Do I think it's far enough? I don't think it's even close to far enough. I think it's still been too slow, and I think again there is this this habit of cascading it down to local authorities, and some local authorities can be very good, very agile, very dynamic. Look at things like what Greater Manchester are doing at the moment. Actually, Ealing are normally quite on the front foot as well. But other local authorities don't necessarily have this as a priority, and I think the government needs to be more dictatorial in terms of these areas. They're quite comfortable to be dictatorial on some areas, but when it comes to active travel and sustainable transport, they always, pardon the pun, soft pedal it. So no, I think they could be doing more in terms of leading. And I think whilst the financial contributions that they're talking about are very encouraging, it's worth bearing in mind that this is over a 5-year period. And when you start to split it down to an annual amount, it's some way behind what's being done in Europe.
We've certainly reflected in the past, Julian, that one of the first cycle lanes in the UK runs very close to your factory, going down from Hanger Lane, I think built in the 1930s, and of course almost 100 years on, and we still don't have a comprehensive cycle network, do we?
And unfortunately, there's still not a cycle lane that goes past our factory, something I'm never as soft on reminding Ealing when I speak to them.
It might be time for you and I to get out there with a pot of paint, I think, Julian, and take some direct action.
I think so.
Now, of course, this week is Mental Health Awareness Week, as many viewers will know. Taking care of our mental health has perhaps never been more important as during this time. So we thought we'd take the opportunity to signpost you to some mental health resources. We're going to bring them up on the screen now. Just a reminder of some of the national organisations doing fantastic work on mental health, and also some local organisations, some links from our local authorities to mental health support that's out there now. We're not expecting you to note all this down at great speed. The final on-demand version of the programme will have all these links underneath in the description for you to click through on. Now, I understand, Anika, that for Mental Health Awareness Week, you organised a kitchen disco for Oxford-based mental health charity Restore, which sounds fantastic. Can you tell us a bit more about what a kitchen disco involves?
Well, I'd love to say I'd organised it. I'm afraid I was only one of the guest DJs. Isolation FM has been started at the start of COVID to provide some light relief, as you might not be going out, but you want to see your friends. So again, it was an example of IT doing some really good things across a number of different platforms. I did the pop hour there for making sure that usually smaller children will be able to see their classmates if they wanted to join in, and they did requests and donated some money to Restore, which is the mental health charity chosen by Isolation FM, and we raised well exceeded our target of over £500. So there was a lot of people that joined in 6 till 12, and we keep doing it, and I think it just reminds us that in this troubled time we need to still have social interaction, have some fun, and why not start with music?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think also really important that we remember the struggle that charities across the UK are facing to maintain their usual revenue streams. So I think a message from all of us today is do find your local mental health charity, and if you feel able, make a contribution to keep their work going at this time. Now I'm going to move us on to our third theme of the morning, and that is the amazing work that's been going on and we've been hearing about in past programmes to fight back against COVID-19 and the work that different companies are doing in that regard. Annika, I know you've been doing what I think is increasingly described as a pivot, certainly in one area of your activity, as you started to explore the challenges of sourcing and manufacturing PPE. I wonder whether you can tell us a bit more about that journey you've been on.
Well, so with that, I don't want to politicise what this is, but all we know is that our China operation were able to do a swift recovery back on the 8th of March, and the instruction then was to wear masks, and we were finding it really hard to get masks here in the UK. So in the end, we started to turn some of our manufacturing in China to medical certified KN95 masks, and we were successful in being interviewed by Crown Commercial Services and also Department of Health bodies, but unfortunately we are left with a fair amount of stock, and therefore obviously we are making sure that we make it available at just above cost price that we have, and we give 10 masks for every 100 sold to recognised charities and groups, but I suppose our general disappointment, frustration, or anxiety is the same as many businesses across the country, which is that the goods were here, the goods were ready to supply. They didn't move into the areas where we thought that they were most needed to, and then we didn't really get much of a sense of who in the UK was able to manufacture it. So that takes us back to this point. And dare I mention, the structures of Brexit going forwards, what is the UK good at manufacturing? And I think I'd like to see on the agenda, is it in PPE? And if not, why not? Let's get it on there.
A really important capability moving forward, and I think the sort of somewhat the chaos that you allude to in PPE supply over the past few months has certainly hit our radar at West London Business, and I think it's going to have to be addressed in the medium term. Julian, over at Brompton Bicycles, you've touched upon the Wheels for Heroes campaign. I think we're going to bring up maybe a reminder, perhaps, of the website address. First of all, for anyone that would still like to make a donation to Wheels for Heroes. But I wonder whether you can tell us a bit more, because from my understanding is there's been sort of two streams. There's both been the hire piece, for people wanting to borrow a Brompton from within the NHS, but then also new bikes that you've been able to gift to NHS workers. Tell us more.
Yeah, so it's forgive me for a short shaggy dog story. It was an accidental campaign. We didn't sit down and say, let's do something marvellous for the NHS. What actually happened was the chief executive at St Bart's happens to be a Brompton bike hire member. And he reached out to us and said, could he borrow 2 or 3 bikes for his staff to use to get to and from the hospital, because they didn't want to be using mass transit at that point in time. We said more than happy to. He then said, could we have another 5? And then 5 turned into 10, 10 turned into 50. And before you knew it, suddenly we've got a lot of bikes going out to the NHS, which was great. But in order to kind of manage that, what we did was we then set up a promo code that the NHS staff could use along with their email address. We didn't realise that what would happen next, and what happened next was this got shared on NHS intranets and NHS WhatsApp groups, and suddenly we're getting people from everywhere from Manchester to Portsmouth who are NHS staff registering for the bikes. And we had more people registered than we physically had bikes available. So we launched a crowdfunder campaign. We contributed into that the equivalent of £100,000 of parts, labour, distribution, etc., and asked people to help us fund these bikes. Due to some incredibly generous donations, we raised over £300,000 in addition to £100,000 we put in, which has allowed us to manufacture around about 800 bikes. They look very jazzy. I'm really, really pleased with how they turned out, actually, because it was all a big rush, but the colour scheme, I think, works very well. And as it stands today, we've now got over 1,500 people registered. Just so you're clear, those bikes are never going to be used for profit. So at the end of this period, this time, as we move into whatever the future looks like, we will only ever use those bikes for achieving modal shift. So whether that's lending 100 of them to a local authority to use in an initiative to get people who are long-term unemployed into cycling, or whether it's working with the likes of Cycling UK and British Cycling on their event, again, to try and get people to try cycling. We hope that this is going to be a really fantastic legacy that not only will kind of continue to deliver a change in the way that people move around cities, but also will keep reminding people what the NHS has been doing for us.
That's really exciting to hear, and something new that I've learnt today, which is fantastic. We'll bring up just one more time on screen a reminder of that URL, the website address, for folk that want to make a donation to support that pool of Brompton bicycles that will be driving modal shift moving forward. Now, our final theme of today's show is perhaps the most exciting. It's about preparing for the long term and what we've got in store next. And over at BDO, Tim, I understand you've been developing a sort of new programme under the concept and sort of brand of Rethink. I wonder whether you can tell us a bit more about what that's about, and I think we'll bring up on screen a graphic to explain it too. Tim.
Yeah, thank you. And I think the fundamental reason for doing this was twofold, really. One was to help to shape our firm-wide thinking as to how we can position ourselves and organise ourselves in terms of the support and services that we can provide to clients, and also more importantly, really, and it comes back to that helping our clients. It's providing a framework that our clients can work to as well. So the key themes to the model is really just sort of setting out the principal stages that an organisation will go through. So we have obviously got our react stage. So this is the immediate response to COVID and safeguarding our business, and that might be around gaining access to funding, how we protect our staff, whether we need to close down our offices and move people to working from home environment, or if we're in manufacturing and continue to operate. Some of those initial activities that we particularly saw across the food manufacturing sector, for example, where we still had to operate, and therefore putting in place those sort of social distancing barriers much earlier on than others. You then move into a resilience phase, which is about how we keep our business operating, and I think most organisations are sitting in that stage at the moment, and that could include sort of returning back to premises, but also looking at sort of medium to longer term funding, looking at our employee requirements, etc., etc. And then the final phase that we were looking to is our realise stage, and that's effectively wanting to reposition our thinking around what the new normal might look like, and that might be within the next sort of 3 months for some organisations, all the way up to the next sort of 12-18 months. The fundamental principle, and why we've called it Rethink, is about having that rethinking process that runs through the entire model. And the reason for reinforcing that is that we have a firm belief that the organisations need to be thinking now, not just about what they're doing in the short and medium term, but actually in the longer term. What does that going to look like for manufacturing in the future? What's globalization, inshoring, in-housing, supply chain operations, etc. What will that look like, and how can we prepare for that now?
And I'm sure many viewers will be reflecting on that diagram and thinking, goodness, where are we on that React Resilience Realise journey? I think we could just bring up on screen a quick reminder of what it means in practice for your clients or prospective clients. Do you want to just talk us through those headlines?
Absolutely, and again touches on some of the things that if we as organisations have an understanding of the different stages and challenges that we might be going through, then obviously we've got improved horizon scanning, so we can start preparing earlier on. It also allows us in BDO to create timely insights that we can share with clients in our role as business advisors, and help to sort of share experiences that we're seeing across other organisations, and be able to really provide that level of support that our clients, particularly in the manufacturing sector, would be expecting from us. But it also helps us to talk through and set out clear guidance around the actions that those organisations might need to be taking in order to prepare for that new future. And I think it just is very, very helpful for us to sort of move some of our thinking away from that initial response to what the effect might be for us in the future. And I think looking at some of the things that Julian's been mentioning around the way in which Brompton's has responded to COVID, but it sounds like there are activities which are going on now, looking at actually what is the world for Brompton going to be in 6-12 months time, and how do we prepare for that?
Indeed. Now, and Anika, picking up on that sort of that last phase of Tim's diagram, sort of realise and succeeding in the new normal. What's your sense of what the long term feels like, and any sort of tips, I suppose, you'd like to share with viewers?
Well, I mean, pre-pandemic, the economy was very slow. It was only at around about 1.2% up, and then they had forecasts, I think, looking at this year being -6%, next year possibly 6% up, which means net zero. So ultimately, if we can maintain a kind of net zero year on year, that would be absolutely fantastic. I'm determined to be positive in terms of this Recover 2020 programme, and I love the way that those 3 steps there that we've just heard from Tim. I mean, not going into the detail, but I think the main thing is to focus on what you found that you're good at, and keep lean. Cash is king. I do think that you can't do it alone. I do think you need to use your networks as much as possible now between anybody and everybody that you feel is useful in different areas of your business. I think the West London business has got lots of different signposting places where businesses who are in this consideration phase might like to go and talk to see what's out there for them. I do think it's important to have your plan now. Over the next 4 weeks, it's very important to have the plan for return to work, even within the next 2 weeks. But do be flexible about that. You might have to make some changes along the way, and most importantly, I think, is really see the opportunities. This has been utterly awful for everybody, but there are some good things. Let's really focus on the opportunities. Let's see what our staff are best at, what our supply chain is best at, what our consumers are now wanting. Make sure we're really listening and observing, and then actioning what we've got out there in terms of the resources for us.
So seize the opportunities, and then also I think it's a very striking observation around the CO2 emissions reduction, and how do we kind of keep hold of that as we come out of lockdown. Julian, what's your take as you reflect on BDO's kind of realise phase, and how we should all succeed in the new normal?
I think it's a very good and very appropriate graphic. I mean, what we have seen. We work across 44 markets at Brompton, so we've had the luxury, if you like, of seeing how markets react at the different phases of COVID. Now, everything from business countries deep in lockdown right through to countries now that are opening right up again. And what we've seen overall in terms of businesses is this feels more like a pause than a crash. And so we have seen that our businesses have returned to pre kind of COVID levels. Now, to be very, very clear, it has involved us having to have a serious rethink in what we were offering, how we're offering it. As an example, my section of the business, Brompton Bike Hire, we've switched away from what we normally do in terms of short-term rentals, because people obviously have concerns about sharing stuff at the moment, which is understandable. And we've kind of pivoted, which is that word, to a long-term rental, so that people can rent a bike 30 days at a time. And that seems to be addressing a very real need in this realised part for businesses when they're looking at companies. So whilst we never sat down and thought of it in those terms, it certainly seems to reflect the way that we've been thinking our process out of the business. And I think in terms of post the COVID, yes, we've seen a great drop in CO2. I think, however, there is a very, very important moment coming, and that's as people return to work. And one of two things could happen. People could either revert to type, they could alternatively revert to car, which is a very real risk of people going into cities and not wanting to be buses on trains, or they could generate a new good habit, which would involve active travel, would involve cycling, electric bikes, even, though it pains me to say it, electric scooters, and move into a new way. But at the moment we're on that tipping point, and it could easily be that we'll see just as much pollution in 3 months' time as we had 6 months ago.
Thank you, Julian. Now I'm going to bring Pim back in for perhaps a final question or two from our YouTube viewers. Pim.
Final question for Anika. What would your advice be to other manufacturing companies who are thinking about seizing the opportunities, as you mentioned just now, and pivoting as you have done to manufacture different products? What are the most important things that they might need to consider before doing this?
Well, it's got to be a logical pivot. And thank you very much for that question, because it does mean that we've already started thinking in what's out there for us. But not something completely new, but something which is already something that you're used to. So we already make paper products, and a lot of them. So the technology involved in the PPE masks, KN95s, is an easier shift for us than if we turned into making Brompton bikes, for example, which we would never be able to do. We also are very strong in a certain area of our supply chain. So that means we know our supply chain. So we know our product, we know our supply chain, payment terms. We are making sure that we are very clear on the payment terms. So as Tim said right at the very start, make sure that you know what kind of contract you're getting into, because it might be an unknown territory. So and fourth of all, make sure you know who your customers are. Maybe it's not the wisest place now to start doing a completely new customer base. So using all the things that you already know your product, know your supply chain, know your customer, then I think it's a good shift to do. And we've seen lots of businesses do it successfully.
Tim, do you have any reflections on that theme that you'd like to share?
I think the main one for me is that it's this whole period has proved just how innovative we can be as an economy and as a manufacturing sector. We've been having lots of conversations internally where we've been seeing clients who have been able to adapt. I've got a manufacturing client who's moved from making sort of standard sort of widgets into now making sort of proximity sensors. And I agree with Anika. I think it's about recognizing the strengths that you have as an organization and utilizing those and thinking differently. But don't overstretch yourself. You do need to be making sure that it fits within your remit and how you operate as an organization, and that's going to be very much dependent on your supply chain. It's we can't all turn around as Anika said and start making bicycles. But we can do what we can do.
So a very clear message, I think, there of sticking to your strengths, knowing what they are, and kind of building out from there. Now, we're coming close to the top of the hour, but Julian, I think you mentioned a little bit earlier in the programme your corporate hire scheme. Do you want to just give us a sort of final reminder of what's involved, and most importantly, if one of our viewers would like to sign up, who should they get in touch with, and how? Julian.
Thank you. Well, we didn't originally plan to launch this until later this year, but we had so many people reach out to us and say, how can we get our staff back to work, that we decided to bring it forward. So in essence, what it is people get to sign up, and we will deliver a Brompton to their business, or as many Bromptons as they would like to their business, and they will then have that for, if it's a single Brompton, it's £25 a month plus VAT, so that's £1 a day. In essence, if it's more than 10, then we can do some discounts. And it's just as simple as that. You keep hold of the Brompton for as many months as you need it, and if you ever have a problem with it, you can drop it back in one of our docks and get one that doesn't have a puncture, and keep going. And I'm happy to say that as of today, we have over 100 people who've taken this offer up in the last 5 days. But I'll be delighted to help any of the West London businesses out who would like to have a look at getting some bikes for their staff to use to get back into work.
Really exciting to hear the enthusiastic take up there of the new scheme. Well, as always, the hour just flies by. So it is, of course, the point where I must say thank you once again to my production team, the stars that are Pim and Janelle, working behind the scenes to make this show such a success, as well as Joel at Revolution Audio. Thank you to my panel today. They were Anika Boston-Gett, Director of Sustainability and co-founder of Rapology, Tim Foster, Partner in Risk Advisory Services at BDO, and Julian Scriven, Managing Director at Brompton Bike Hire. As always, continue to share your thoughts with us and visit coronavirus.westlondon.com for the latest information and support. To speak to a human being about your concerns, call us on 020 8607 2500. If you haven't yet subscribed to our YouTube channel, please click on the button below the video stream to stay informed and show your support for our work. Diarise next Thursday, the 28th of May at 10 a.m. for our next talk at 10, when we'll explore how to navigate HR issues arising from the pandemic 3 months in. Until then, we wish you, your friends, family and colleagues good health, and please maintain social distancing wherever possible to stay safe.